Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, October 27, 2003. At 6:42 a.m., two unmarked sedans and a Franklin County Sheriff's unit rolled to a stop along a short cul-de-sac on the west side of town. Porch lights were on up and down the street. A thin frost sat on mailbox lids. Detectives from Chambersburg Police Department coordinated with the Pennsylvania State Police, Troop H. The operation followed a sealed arrest warrant authorized the previous evening by Judge Michael T. Rowland on a probable cause affidavit prepared by Detective Sean Whitaker and reviewed by District Attorney Karen Delaney. The subject stepped into view behind the front window before the team reached the porch. The blinds closed. Detective Whitaker knocked and announced. Lieutenant Raymond Keller of the Pennsylvania State Police Major Case Unit stood left of the doorframe, out of view. Sergeant Donna Pierce, the department's evidence custodian, waited with a clipboard at the base of the steps to begin the chronological log the moment entry occurred. The door opened. A man in a work jacket and wire-rimmed glasses stood in the threshold with empty hands visible, jaw set, eyes forward. He did not speak. He complied with verbal commands. Hinged cuffs were applied, double-locked. A transporting deputy guided him down the steps and across a narrow flagstone path to the rear seat of an unmarked sedan with disabled inner handles. The seatbelt was fastened, the door closed. Detective Whitaker read the charges in a standard tone. The subject stared at the frost on the grass and gave no comment. Under the order's terms, the arrest was to be executed prior to 7:30 a.m., with a separate search warrant to follow upon confirmation of custody. Sergeant Pierce noted the times. Door opened at 6:45, cuffs secured at 6:46, transport initiated at 6:49. A neighbor in a robe paused with a newspaper in hand and did not raise it to read. Another resident stepped back inside and drew a curtain. The entry team documented the condition of the door, the strike plate, and the deadbolt position with a simple sequence of photographs. The interior threshold received a strip camera log, time, date, operator, and frame numbers. The residence, a 1.5-story frame house with a detached garage, did not show disarray. A metal thermos stood on a small table near the door. A calendar hung on the wall, open to October. A hook beside the jamb held a key ring with 2 keys and a small plastic whistle. Nothing in plain view was moved. Items that would later fall within the search parameters were photographed in place and left untouched pending presentation of the signed warrant. By 6:58 a.m., the transport unit departed for the Franklin County Jail. A second unit peeled off to establish scene watch at the residence until the search authority arrived. Lieutenant Keller radioed the county attorney's office to confirm the courier's location. Detective Whitaker stepped onto the porch to confer with District Attorney Delaney by phone about anticipated questions on chain of custody once the warrant was executed. Sergeant Pierce affixed temporary scene tape from the porch rail to the mailbox post, not to exclude the residents, none remained, but to mark the evidence boundary for the log. The arrest was not the beginning of anything. It was a point on a line that started in 1999 behind a blue-painted barn near the agricultural edge of Chambersburg. For 4 years, a single case number sat on a metal shelf, then moved to a smaller shelf, then returned to a desk under a lamp where a detective read it again and requested a lab review. In the box were photographs of a compact sedan at the edge of gravel, a corrugated plastic bin with blank order forms, and lengths of carton sealing tape with adhesive faces protected by backing paper. The file held names: Melissa Hart, age 30, her sister, Emily Davenport, her mother, Patricia Hart, a warehouse security guard, Nathan O'Leary, a park maintenance worker, Raymond Lutz. The names of officers were there as well: Whitaker, Pierce, Keller. The file also held the absence that sustained the case: no confession, no recovered body, no clear witness to a moment that ended a routine Saturday. At 7:13 a.m., the courier arrived with the signed search warrant and stamped return. Detective Whitaker read it twice on the porch, then once aloud to Sergeant Pierce for the log. The warrant authorized a search of the residence, detached garage, and a pickup truck parked in the driveway for specific items: packaging tape and dispensers, cutting tools, clothing and footwear consistent with documented transfers, notebooks or ledgers reflecting movements or schedules for the relevant period, and any items bearing biological or trace material subject to later lab analysis. The scope was narrow: Each category in the warrant mirrored a section of the affidavit that had been sealed. The search began at 7:21 a.m. A state lab photographer, Mark Alvarez, set white balance and bracketed exposures on the entry. Detective Whitaker moved clockwise from the front room, calling out each room's designation. Sergeant Pierce wrote it down with block letters and underlines: front room, kitchen, hall, bedroom 1, bedroom 2, bath, basement, garage, vehicle. She initialed each heading and left a blank line beneath for item entries. Gloves changed between rooms, change times were logged. In the kitchen, a notepad lay open with a list: stamps, trash bags, tape, coffee. A roll of clear packaging tape stood upright on the counter, half used. It was common brand stock. No unique features were apparent. The roll was photographed in place, then photographed with an evidence marker, then left undisturbed until an evidence bag number was assigned. A drawer held a red-handled box cutter. Its blade was extended one notch. Adhesive residue darkened the first millimeter near the tip. The cutter was photographed, closed, and placed on a clean surface to await packaging. In the hall closet, a work jacket contained a folded receipt from a shipping counter dated 2 days prior to the 1999 event. The jacket and receipt were photographed. The receipt's vendor stamp was legible, but faded. In the basement utility area, a shelving unit held a plastic bin with event supplies, clipboards, survey tape, a first aid kit, a roll of gray duct tape, 2 rolls of clear tape, one on a dispenser. In the detached garage, a pegboard above a workbench held cutting pliers, utility knives, and a tape gun with a partially used roll of transparent tape. The tape gun's free end showed an irregular torn edge. Under magnification, a faint transfer smear appeared on the first layer of adhesive. None of these observations constituted conclusions on scene. They were notes to accompany later lab work. Sergeant Pierce wrote the description without extrapolation, as required. For the vehicle, a green pickup, Detective Whitaker documented the condition of the cab and the bed. The bed held a plastic tote with tarps, bungee cords, and a small cooler. A second roll of clear tape, this one in its original shrink wrap, sat beneath the tote. The cab floor held a carton of printed sign-in sheets from a community class. The driver's door panel bore no obvious stains or marks. Everything was photographed before packaging. Bag numbers began at P001 and proceeded in collection order. Each bag received a pre-printed seal, initialed across the tape by the collector. At 8:05 a.m., the transport unit pulled into the sally port at the jail. Intake proceeded by procedure: identification, property inventory, booking photographs, 10-print card. Deputy Marshal Everett Quinn logged the time. The subject asked for a phone call. The request was noted. A deputy provided a county-issued jacket. The subject was placed alone in a holding cell pending arraignment. No statements were made. The affidavit remained sealed. Back at the residence, the search continued without haste. The team avoided cumulative handling. A single person touched an item from its photographed position to its bag. Lieutenant Keller maintained a running checklist for later cross-reference with the warrant's categories. Sergeant Pierce marked the chain of custody for each bag with time, date, collector, location within the residence, and a short description in neutral terms: clear tape roll, kitchen counter, utility knife, kitchen drawer, tape gun with roll, garage pegboard, duct tape roll, basement shelf, clear tape, vehicle bed, under tote. At 9:12 a.m., District Attorney Delaney arrived briefly at the scene perimeter to confer with Detective Whitaker about next steps. The plan involved immediate transfer of selected items to the Pennsylvania State Police Bureau of Forensic Services latent print unit for adhesive processing using vacuum metal deposition, as well as packaging for potential end-match comparison to preserved fragments collected in October 1999. The DA's office would coordinate the courier schedule and maintain a duplicate of the chain of custody log for court presentation. No items left the scene without countersignature from both the collecting officer and the supervising detective. The house itself remained orderly. A calendar near the kitchen showed recurring notes for evening classes at the high school, football game standbys, and a blood drive. Handwriting was consistent. A narrow shelf held binders labeled training. A garage cabinet contained a coil of nylon rope and a box of nitrile gloves. None of these were probative in isolation. The warrant language prevented fishing. The team adhered to it. The objective was not to fill bags. It was to collect items that could be tested and either excluded or included by laboratory methods already in motion. Outside, the cul-de-sac stayed quiet. A school bus passed the main street and did not turn in. A waste management truck rattled past the intersecting corner and moved on. The perimeter tape held. A cruiser repositioned to allow a driveway across the street to remain accessible. The scene was visible enough to begin a chain of neighborhood information by 10 a.m., but no press had been advised. When a local freelance photographer arrived, Lieutenant Keller requested he remain behind the marked line and advised that a statement would be issued after arraignment. The photographer took one wide shot of the address marker and left. At 10:28 a.m., a sealed carry case left the residence for the state lab, with 2 officers in a unit assigned solely to transport evidence. Inside were 4 items designated for priority: the kitchen counter roll of clear tape, the tape gun and roll from the garage, the red-handled box cutter, and the shrink-wrapped roll from the truck bed. Each was packaged to prevent abrasion of adhesive faces. The remaining items, duct tape, clothing, binders, were logged for later analysis as needed. Sergeant Pierce recorded the transfer, the unit number, and the officers' names: Officer Leah Randolph and Officer Victor Ames. Lieutenant Keller followed the unit to the interstate on-ramp and then returned to the scene. The subject remained in custody. Judge Rowland scheduled arraignment for the following morning. District Attorney Delaney's office prepared a brief statement: an arrest pursuant to a sealed warrant in connection with the disappearance of Melissa Hart. A search conducted under a separate warrant. Arraignment set for October 28th. No further comment on evidence. Detectives notified Patricia Hart and Emily Davenport before the statement went out. The call lasted minutes. It conveyed the fact of the arrest and the timing of the first appearance. It did not describe the search or its targets. By early afternoon, the residence had been mapped, photographed, and reduced to a series of labeled bags and scene diagrams. The tape across the door was replaced with a signed seal indicating the house was secure. An officer remained on scene watch. Detective Whitaker returned to the station to finalize the transmittal to the lab and to add an addendum to the affidavit summarizing the morning's actions without divulging content. The addendum recorded the time of arrest, the time of transport, the time of search initiation, and the time of transfer to the lab. It attached a copy of Sergeant Pierce's log. The laboratory steps had been rehearsed months earlier, when the case was placed in a queue for adhesive processing and end-match comparison. In 1999, the tape fragments collected behind the blue barn had been protected by backing paper and sealed. Conventional powdering had been avoided on the adhesive faces. In 2003, vacuum metal deposition on adhesive surfaces, gold-zinc sequence under negative pressure, was available through a state partnership. The latent print unit's plan was to process the preserved fragments and any contemporary rolls seized under warrant, photograph developed friction skin detail if present, and conduct ACE-V comparisons. Separately, the toolmarks bench would attempt a physical fit, or end match, between torn edges if a torn edge existed on any roll seized and any fragment retained. The plan did not depend on confession or on accident. It depended on whether adhesive held what it often holds when touched, and whether torn edges interlock uniquely. At 2:17 p.m., the evidence transport unit checked in at the lab loading bay. The receiving technician, Carla Nguyen, signed for each item and placed them in a controlled intake locker. The latent unit supervisor, Linda Moreno, CLPE, logged a priority note to align the seized roll's free ends under magnification and photograph edge contours before any other treatment that could alter the tear. A separate memo noted that if adhesive faces on preserved 1999 fragments yielded friction skin after vacuum metal deposition, the lab would request palm exemplars from individuals identified in the affidavit for possible hypothenar or thenar comparisons. The memo included a contact number for Detective Whitaker. Back at the station, Sergeant Pierce closed her log for the day with a final note: scene secured 14:55, key in evidence safe. Watch assigned to Officer Braxton until 8 Kao. The house remained under seal. The transport log for the subject noted status as in custody, no statements. The docket assigned a number to the arraignment calendar. The case that had moved in steps of inches now occupied a day measured in discrete times and signatures. 6:42 arrival, 6:46 cuffs, 7:13 warrant arrival, 7:21 search initiation, 10:28 lab transfer, 14:55 scene secure. None of those times answered the central question. They positioned the case to answer it with methods that hold in court. The arrest did not disclose identity to the public. It did not reveal what lay in the sealed affidavit beyond process and logistics. It did not announce conclusions. It documented custody, a search under narrow authority, and a transfer of items selected for tests that, if positive, would be presented as photographs, edge profiles, and friction skin features that jurors could see without interpretation beyond the examiner's map. The subject sat in a cell with a jacket issued by the county. The street returned to its normal pattern. The blue barn stood where it had stood in 1999, paint faded, corrugated shadow fixed. The file at the station remained open on a table, its tab labeled with a name that had not left the town's memory, Melissa Hart. On October 23, 1999, Melissa Hart, 30, a shift manager at Keystone Farm Hardware, closed the store at 9:02 p.m., balanced the till, and initialed the nightly reconciliation sheet alongside the owner, Harold Linwood. Co-worker Janine Parker watched her lock the side employee door at 9:07 p.m. and carry a shallow corrugated tote marked Forms, Returns, Orders to her silver Toyota Corolla. The route to her apartment off Wayne Avenue was under 15 minutes. She did not arrive. At 6:51 a.m. on October 24th, borough maintenance worker Raymond Lutz radioed in an unattended vehicle at the agricultural edge west of town, near a weathered blue barn off a gravel cutout along Cornman Road. The Corolla sat nose-in to a fence line, driver's side facing open field. The barn's exterior, the landmark that would define the case, was painted a uniform faded blue. A rusted sliding door stood half open. Lutz remained with the car until patrol arrived. Detective Sean Whitaker responded with officers Leah Randolph and Victor Ames. The Corolla's doors were locked, glass was intact, keys were not present. Through the driver's window, Whitaker observed the corrugated tote on the passenger seat. Blank order forms, a plastic ledger clipboard, and a roll of clear carton sealing tape with its free end folded back on itself. 2 short strips of the same tape lay on the gravel near the driver's door, adhesive sides exposed, each under 2 inches long, slightly curled with dust, adhered. A 3rd strip rested against the tire. 6 feet from the bumper, a single metallic red thread, consistent with commercial pallet strapping, lay partly embedded in the gravel. No purse was visible in the vehicle. The trunk lid showed fresh, linear abrasions across the lip, consistent with contact by a box edge. Sergeant Donna Pierce established a perimeter with tape from the fence post to the rear quarter panel and to the shoulder, then started the chronological log: time of arrival, names, actions. Lieutenant Raymond Keller from Pennsylvania State Police, Troop H, joined the scene within the hour as liaison. A search grid was laid out from the driver's side in 5 by 5 meter squares. Items were flagged before collection. The tape fragments, designated items A1, A2, and A3, were transferred with clean forceps to individual paper folds and then to envelopes. Backing paper was applied to the adhesive faces to prevent contact in transit. Each envelope received date, time, location, and collector initials. The Corolla was photographed in situ, including tire position relative to unique gravel patterns, then towed undercover to the police garage after a tow operator, Dennis Morales, signed the chain of custody transfer. A scene sketch recorded distances between the driver's door, the tape fragments, the fence line, and the barn threshold. Footwear impressions in soft shoulder soil were photographed with a scale. None yielded a class characteristic match on scene. Officers canvassed residences along Cornman Road and adjoining farmhouses. Within the first 12 hours, Detective Whitaker verified Melissa Hart's last movements through employee statements and written logs. Janine Parker confirmed Melissa carried the forms tote out of the store. Harold Linwood confirmed that the nightly deposit remained in the safe and would be handled by him the next morning, consistent with store practice. A time-stamped clipboard page from the closing checklist showed Melissa's initials at doors locked and safe verified. No CCTV existed inside the store. An external camera installed at a neighboring auto shop had been inoperative for months, according to the owner, Byron Tate. The vehicle processing occurred in the department garage with controlled handling. Exterior door handles and the trunk lip were swabbed for DNA. Interior surfaces were powdered for latent prints. The steering wheel yielded smudged ridge detail insufficient for identification. No visible blood was found. Presumptive tests on faint discolorations on the rear seat were negative. The rolled clear tape in the tote was photographed. Its free end exhibited a rough tear. The tote was vacuumed over filter paper for trace recovery. In the corrugated flutes of the tote wall, a short brown hair fragment was discovered. The fragment lacked a visible root. A second hair, a lighter, rootless fragment, was later observed embedded on the adhesive face of item A2 under low magnification. Both were preserved intact. The barn and surrounding area were searched by grid. A warehouse security guard, Nathan O'Leary, who patrolled a nearby cold storage building, reported seeing a compact sedan enter the gravel cutout close to 9:30 p.m., but could not provide plate or color with certainty. He supplied a written statement. A long-haul driver, Ronald Keene, who routinely used Cornman Road as a shortcut, told officers he had noticed 2 vehicles by the barn around 10 p.m., one compact, one a light truck, but admitted he had not slowed and could not identify makes. Both statements were placed in the file. No one reported hearing a struggle. K9 tracking began at 11:14 a.m. Trooper Gina Holloway deployed K9 Rex from the driver's door. The dog pulled along a shallow arc toward the barn threshold, lost the scent briefly, then angled back to the fence line and out toward the gravel shoulder before circling and losing the track near rutted tractor marks. A second track from the tote yielded the same pattern. Trooper Holloway noted shifting wind across open field and multiple vehicle tracks in the gravel as potential factors degrading scent. Casts of the best-defined shoe impressions produced partial outsoles lacking unique wear features. Class characteristics suggested a common athletic shoe. By late afternoon, Melissa Hart was entered as a missing adult with elevated risk. District Attorney Karen Delaney authorized public release of a bulletin featuring a current photograph and descriptors. Detective Whitaker interviewed family, Patricia Hart, the mother, and Emily Davenport, the sister. Both reported that Melissa had planned a quiet weekend, no travel, and had not mentioned meeting anyone after work. Financials for the previous week showed no unusual withdrawals. Paycheck deposit had posted on Friday. Phone records for the Hart residence indicated no outgoing or incoming calls after 6:18 p.m. on Saturday. Melissa did not carry a cell phone. Volunteer staging opened on October 25th at the high school parking lot. Sign-in and sector boards were managed by Officer Leah Randolph. Search lines covered fence rows, drainage ditches, and the hedgerow behind the blue barn. Private outbuildings within a 1-mile radius were checked with owner consent. The barn's interior, hayloft, equipment bay, and a narrow tack room showed no overt signs of a struggle. A bale hook on a wall rack bore a smear of clear adhesive residue. A swab was collected. In the tack room, a narrow scrap of cardboard with a strip of clear tape still attached was bagged as item B5. All tape-bearing items were protected from friction and heat. Early-stage limitations and errors were documented. An initial patrol officer, Stephen Malloy, had cupped hands to the driver's window before the perimeter expanded. His latex gloves were bagged and logged, and his contact was noted for later elimination. The tow occurred before a full daylight sweep under the Corolla's footprint. While photographs captured tire positions, small trace transfer during lift could not be ruled out. The scene log captured these decisions and their rationale. None were outside policy for the period, but each added variables to later interpretation. The Pennsylvania State Police Bureau of Forensic Services received the first shipment of evidence on October 26. Items A1 through A3, tape fragments, the in-tote clear tape roll, the bale hook swab, the tack room cardboard with adhered tape, B5, and vacuum filter debris from the Corolla. Receiving technician Linda Moreno documented intake. The latent unit avoided conventional powder on adhesive faces by design. A memo from the unit chief recommended preserving the adhesive evidence for a higher sensitivity process, vacuum metal deposition, if and when that capability became available through a regional lab partnership. In 1999, that process was not routinely accessible. The adhesive items were therefore packaged with backing and refrigerated storage noted for temperature stability. Detective Whitaker built parallel tracks: elimination and scope. Elimination prints and buckle swabs by consent were collected from store personnel, Harold Linwood and Janine Parker, the maintenance discoverer, Raymond Lutz, the nearby security guard, Nathan O'Leary, and family, with Patricia Hart providing a maternal line reference for possible unidentified remains comparison. Corporal Thomas Briggs collected a reference set from the tow operator, Dennis Morales. None of the rolled fingerprints matched the low-quality latents pulled from the Corolla's interior. Palm exemplars were not yet standard in elimination sets and were not obtained at this stage. Scope focused on movement around the blue barn and the cutout. A property map identified routine users, farmhands employed by Arthur McKendry, a feed distributor who leased the barn, drivers for Shippensburg cold storage, and borough maintenance crews. Interviews with farmhands, including Michael Rupp and Charles Haynes, produced no time-specific sightings. O'Leary's patrol log showed a pass at 9:15 p.m. and again at 10:40 p.m. The log lacked vehicle entries at those times. The patchy nature of these records reflected the period and location. On October 28th, a dive team from Franklin County coordinated with Trooper Holloway to check irrigation ponds within a half-mile. Visibility was poor. Nothing linked to Melissa Hart was recovered. Side-scan sonar was not used. The county did not possess a unit in 1999. A door-to-door check along Cornman Road and the adjacent Cold Spring Road documented exterior lights that were on and any occupants who were awake. An elderly resident, Dorothy Nagel, reported hearing an engine idling for a while around 9:45 p.m. She could not see the road from her kitchen window. Her note entered the file. The Corolla's trunk abrasion was photographed with oblique lighting. Comparative test contacts using corrugated boxes of similar dimensions suggested the marks were consistent with placing and removing a box or tote. The missing purse remained a critical absence. When a purse matching Melissa's description surfaced near a culvert on November 2nd, it belonged to another resident. The tip line, managed by Officer Victor Ames, logged calls asserting sightings in neighboring towns. Cross-checks with bank records and known movements cleared them. In November, the lab issued a preliminary report. No usable latent prints on non-adhesive surfaces. The bail hook swab contained only trace environmental debris. The tack room cardboard showed clear tape residue, but no ridge detail using non-destructive optical methods. The adhesive side items remained unprocessed by traditional means to preserve potential for VMD. The two hair fragments, one from the tote flute and one from the adhesive face of item A2, were catalogued as rootless. The lab recommended maintaining both for potential mitochondrial DNA sequencing through an external laboratory if authorization and funding were obtained. Detective Whitaker documented that recommendation and forwarded a request through District Attorney Delaney's office for mtDNA testing funding. The request entered a queue. By December 1999, the public narrative stabilized. A missing 30-year-old woman, a car by a blue barn, a community search, no arrest. The private narrative accumulated procedure, scene logs, adhesive fragments preserved for a process the department did not yet access, and a pair of rootless hairs that could not be profiled with nuclear DNA. The winter's snow covered the gravel cutout more than once. Patrol cars passed the location on routine loops. The file did not close in 2000. It moved. Detective Whitaker added an addendum in March documenting second sweeps of the barn after thaw with no new evidence. He recorded interviews with a seasonal driver, Henry Castillo, who had been off route the night of October 23rd and denied using Cornman Road. He logged a visit with Patricia Hart to obtain a fresh photograph for a poster replacement. The case entered a cadence: review, check, wait for lab scheduling. In late 2001, the Bureau of Forensic Services notified Whitaker that a regional partnership would make limited VMD runs available for adhesive evidence from selected cases. The Hart case, with preserved clear tape fragments from the scene and tape-bearing cardboard from the barn, met the criteria. Meanwhile, the district attorney's office secured funding to submit the two rootless hairs for mitochondrial DNA sequencing at a qualified laboratory. Paperwork moved as evidence moves, with signatures, seals, and dates. Between 2001 and mid-2003, a handful of seemingly relevant items were logged and cleared. A box cutter recovered from a roadside ditch matched no residue or tool marks to the scene cutters. A receipt found in a storm drain referenced a purchase of clear tape days after the crime. It belonged to a local packing business unrelated to Melissa Hart. Each generated entries that closed on their own dates. The community presence persisted without spectacle. A small vigil organized by Emily Davenport and supported by the church secretary, Carol Mays, placed candles near the high school green. Volunteers brought flyers to the feed store. A letter to the editor by Harold Linwood thanked those who searched and asked residents to keep checking outbuildings. These actions entered the file as context when officers were present and witnessed them. Otherwise, they were simply part of town life. By early 2003, the case's leverage points were explicit in a memo Whitaker wrote to District Attorney Delaney. Adhesive-backed clear tape fragments from the gravel by the driver's door. A roll of clear tape in the tote. A scrap of cardboard with clear tape still attached inside the barn. 2 rootless hairs, one embedded in adhesive, and a protected chain of custody that had not been broken. The memo requested that when VMD became available, the Hart evidence be scheduled. It also recommended that, if VMD produced friction skin detail of value on the adhesive face, the department collect full palm exemplars, not only rolled fingerprints, from selected individuals whose names appeared frequently in the file due to proximity to the barn, work rolls, or volunteer activity during the search period. The barn did not change. The paint continued to fade. The fence line sagged. Trucks still used Cornman Road. The cutout where the Corolla had been found remained a gravel wedge with room for one car and a truck to nose past. What changed was available method. In June 2003, Linda Moreno at the latent unit entered the Hart adhesive items onto a bench schedule for vacuum metal deposition. The mtDNA submissions for the 2 hairs were logged into an external lab queue through District Attorney Delaney's office, with Patricia Hart's buccal swab attached as the maternal reference for exclusion purposes. The file, which for 3 years had primarily recorded searches and interviews, now recorded 2 technical steps that, if successful, would convert preserved adhesive and a fragment of hair into admissible specific results. The second narrative, the one involving people who stood at sign-in tables and walked fields, would continue into the next part. For now, the case still contained a car by a blue barn, 3 short strips of clear tape on gravel, a tote of blank forms, and a name on a tab that did not leave the town's memory. The investigative path that would carry the file from this point to an indictment ran through adhesive chemistry, friction skin development under vacuum, and mitochondrial sequencing of rootless hair. Those were scheduled, not speculative. They were the next entries in a log that had not been interrupted since 9:07 p.m. on October 23, 1999, when Melissa Hart locked a side door and carried a tote to her car. David Pritchard's name entered the file early and for ordinary reasons. He was the assistant principal at Chambersburg Area High School and the volunteer commissioner of the South Franklin Youth Baseball League. He also served on the deacon board at First Baptist Church. His roles put him in front of groups, in charge of logistics, and in proximity to supplies that most offices keep: tape, forms, clipboards, and sign-in sheets. He was known to store a box of event materials in his truck during spring and fall seasons. He had purchased classroom and field supplies for years from Keystone Farm Hardware, where Melissa Hart worked. Invoices in the school bookkeeper's files showed routine small purchases attributed to Pritchard, athletics, facilities. Staff at the store recognized him as a regular customer who moved quickly through transactions and carried items out himself. On October 25, 1999, 2 days after Melissa's disappearance, Pritchard arrived at the volunteer staging area at the high school parking lot before the sign-in table was set. He unloaded clipboards, pre-printed grid sheets, and a roll of clear carton tape from a plastic tote. He told Officer Leah Randolph he could run the sign-in board if needed. She assigned him to that station for the morning while officers briefed search lines. He wrote headers on the board in block letters: sector, row lead, time out, time back, and handed out numbered cards to line leaders. He taped a laminated map to a folding table, fixed the corners with clear tape, and returned to the back of the line when a new sector opened. When an officer asked for someone to keep first aid supplies accessible, he placed bandages, water, and a waste bag under the table and pointed out the location to a volunteer. He was visible the next day at the same table. He asked Detective Sean Whitaker if it would help to laminate sector maps to withstand light rain and offered the school laminator after hours. Whitaker said laminated maps would hold up better. Pritchard returned that evening with a stack. He did not cross scene tape. He reiterated the standard instruction, flag items and do not touch them, for anyone who signed out. He did not give direction beyond that instruction unless an officer was present. His presence fit a category the department relied on, civilians who could keep track of names and times. His contact with the family was limited to logistics. He called Emily Davenport on October 27th to say that Sunday's sector boards would move to the church hall if rain persisted. He brought coffee to Patricia Hart. The morning flyers were restocked at the high school and asked if the family needed someone to coordinate the next delivery to local stores. He stood in the last row at a vigil on the green and, when the pastor, Reverend Elaine Monroe, asked for a closing word, he read a short passage and asked volunteers to keep checking out buildings. People thanked him as they left. No one wrote complaints about his conduct. The sign-in ledger he kept for the staging area, names, phone numbers, times, became a working document officers referenced when clarifying who had been where on a given day. The church deacon board printed and distributed flyers in November. Pritchard was listed on the distribution roster with others, including Carol Mays and Daniel Fine. He sent an email from his school account to staff asking them to post one flyer on each floor near the elevators and to route inquiries to the police tip line rather than to the office. The email was standard and brief. The school retained a printed copy in the principal's communications file. In the youth league, he delayed equipment pickup for a week to avoid conflicting with searches. When Fields needed chalking for a charity 5K, he arrived with a crew and supervised chalk lines. He remained at the periphery of operations any time law enforcement was present. When he was in charge, youth baseball or school events, he was central. The distinction was practical and visible. On paper, his first statement in the case file is dated October 26, 1999. He told Detective Whitaker he had been at home the evening of October 23rd, handled school paperwork, and went to bed early. He said he did not visit Keystone Farm Hardware that night and had last spoken to Melissa days earlier at the checkout when he purchased lawn bags and clear tape for a bulletin board project. He acknowledged knowing the Blue Barn area as a landmark on county roads used after games. He denied being on Cornman Road the night Melissa disappeared. He signed the statement. The school's evening security sign-in for October 23rd showed no entry by him that night. Photocopier usage logs for the same period were not preserved. When the department collected elimination fingerprints from visible volunteers and routine users of the barn property, he appeared at the station and gave a 10-print card without comment. Palm exemplars were not requested in that round. He also provided a buccal swab for elimination purposes with a signed consent form. Sergeant Donna Pierce logged both items under the elimination roster and filed the consent. Those documents sat for years in a section labeled Elims, separate from the primary case narrative. The Blue Barn Ledger, the sign-in book that volunteers used at the high school during the first 2 weeks, remained in police custody once the initial search phase ended. The ledger documented Pritchard's presence across multiple days as either a staging assistant or a line volunteer. It also showed routine proximity to supplies, rows of entries noting maps laminated, clipboards restocked, tape replaced, and coffee delivered. None of that was unusual for someone in his position. A separate note in the ledger's back flap showed a list of addresses with check marks. Those were small businesses where flyers had been posted. Keystone Farm Hardware appeared on the list with the check dated October 26th and initials DP. He served as a de facto coordinator when civilians asked procedural questions. When a freelance photographer approached the scene line at the barn in early November and asked for a shot inside the fence, he told him to wait for the public information officer. When a volunteer tried to bring a dog into a sector without permission, he redirected him to the sign-in table. These interventions appear in officers' notes not as complaints, but as entries. Pritchard referred to PIO. Pritchard redirected volunteer REK9. His interactions stayed within lines drawn by the department. Through winter and spring, he kept the case visible in spaces he managed. He taped a flyer inside the glass case near the high school's main office. Custodian Harold Flynn later logged, taking it down and replacing it when edges curled. At league registration, he set a donation jar labeled for printing costs. He delivered funds to Emily Davenport with a slip showing totals and a signature. Officer Victor Ames noted receipt of a scanned copy when the family provided it for the file. He attended a brief training at the police department in January 2000 for civilian search volunteers wanting to be prepared if sectors reopened. Officer Tina Velasquez led the session. Scene integrity, chain of custody, the importance of paper bags over plastic, and limits on civilian handling. Pritchard sat in the second row, took notes, and nodded at points about not moving items and not crossing tape. He later repeated these points in a faculty meeting when the principal asked him to address staff before a large on-campus event. His access to supplies expanded through role rather than intent. As assistant principal, he had keys to storage where tape, clipboards, and forms were kept. As league commissioner, he had equipment in his garage and truck. As deacon, he had access to a church supply closet where volunteers assembled flyers and mounted them on poster board using clear tape and spray adhesive. When officers later wrote an affidavit describing sources of clear carton sealing tape common in the case, they listed retail, school, league, and church stores as generalized sources in the community. Nothing in that list named him. It described a town in which clear tape was a tool used daily. In April 2000, the church held another vigil. Pritchard stood beside Reverend Monroe as she read the names of volunteers who had searched. He spoke briefly about the community staying organized. The remarks were procedural, not personal. A news brief in the local paper mentioned him by title and role, without paraphrasing. The piece was clipped and added to the case file. When the first anniversary approached in October 2000, he coordinated with Emily Davenport to update posters. He requested and received permission from Detective Whitaker to include the police tip line and a note asking property owners to recheck outbuildings. He delivered laminated posters to the feed store, the post office, and a small print shop. The owner of the print shop, Brenda Coe, noted in an invoice that Pritchard paid for lamination with a check from a church benevolence fund. The invoice was attached to a thank you note the family sent to the church committee. Copies entered the file at the family's request. In 2001, when the Pennsylvania State Police Bureau of Forensic Services notified LPD that adhesive processing by vacuum metal deposition might become available through a regional partnership, that detail was not public. Pritchard did not know about it. He was copied on no memos. He continued to run league meetings and sign building use forms. He appeared at a school board session to present attendance data. He organized a preseason field cleanup and signed for deliveries of chalk and zip ties. Each of these actions appears, if at all, in administrative records unrelated to the criminal file. When detectives interviewed a cross-section of those who had been present often during the initial searches to update contact information in 2002, Pritchard confirmed his phone number and address. He repeated his earlier account of October 23, 1999. Detective Whitaker noted the statement as consistent with prior. He did not inquire into box cutters or tape in that contact. The interview's scope was limited to address confirmation and schedule availability if targeted searches resumed in the spring. The districts of responsibility around the Blue Barn included businesses and farms. Pritchard did not have a formal role there. He had informal familiarity with the roads from coaching and school events. When a rainstorm exposed trash in a drainage culvert along Cornman Road in March 2002 and a caller reported a purse, he was not part of the response. Officers Randolph and Ames cleared the item. When a driver called in 2 vehicles parked near the barn late on a weekend evening in June, the patrol checked and found one to be a couple using the turnout for a phone call. These entries sit alongside Pritchard's name in the file without connecting lines. The file shows proximity only in the way files from small towns do, circles of names around shared places. The informational distance between his public role and the file's core evidence remained wide until 2003. The preserved adhesive fragments from the gravel and the tape-bearing cardboard from the tack room stayed sealed. The 2 rootless hair fragments, one from the tote flute, one embedded on adhesive, stayed preserved for potential mtDNA. The VMD schedule was internal. The ledger from the high school staging table stayed in a bin with scene diagrams and chain of custody forms. When the district attorney's office secured funding for mtDNA testing and the lab scheduled VMD runs for adhesive evidence, The cold case review generated a priority list for collecting palm exemplars in addition to rolled fingerprints. That list drew from those whose names appeared frequently due to proximity, role, or repeated presence: farmhands, drivers, maintenance workers, and visible volunteers. David Pritchard's name appeared with others. He received a call from Detective Whitaker in July 2003 requesting palm prints by appointment as part of a narrowed elimination protocol now that adhesive side latent development was possible. He scheduled a time and appeared at the station. Inked thenar and hypothenar areas were captured, along with interdigital flats, both hands. Sergeant Donna Pierce logged the card and placed it with the others in the locked cabinet. The request did not single him out. It was part of a block of calls. He left the station and returned to work. He chaired a faculty meeting about hall monitoring. He sent an email confirming gym availability for league practice. He passed Reverend Monroe in a grocery aisle and asked if the church needed tables moved for a fundraiser. The routine remained visible. What changed had nothing to do with where he stood at vigils or how he filled out sign-in boards. It had to do with what adhesive holds and what a latent development technique can show when adhesive is kept sealed. The laboratory's schedule moved the case from a ledger and a field map to a bench with a vacuum chamber. The result placed friction skin detail on one of the adhesive fragments and a rootless hair's mtDNA sequence in a report. When those pieces were compared to palm exemplars and maternal line references gathered months earlier, the wide informational distance narrowed into a single path in the file with his name on it. By then, his public presence had become background. People had stopped mentioning his role at the sign-in table. They remembered him as a person who could be relied on to show up with clipboards and tape. He still led opening remarks at a youth league banquet in September 2003 and thanked parents for volunteering. He closed the gym early one night after a custodial call about a leak. These actions are in schedules and logs. They are not part of the narrative that moved when the lab reports arrived. That narrative stopped using a ledger and started using photographs of torn edges and marked ridge features. It is the difference between organizing a search and being placed at the edge of a car with a strip of tape in your hand on the night a person disappeared. In June 2003, the Pennsylvania State Police Bureau of Forensic Services, PSP-BFS, placed items A1 through A3, the clear tape fragments recovered on October 24, 1999, beside Melissa Hart's car, on a bench schedule for vacuum metal deposition. The adhesive faces had been preserved with backing paper since collection. Receiving technician Carla Nguyen logged intake. Latent Unit Supervisor Linda Moreno, CLPE, documented the process sequence. Gold, zinc, under negative pressure to develop friction skin detail on non-porous and adhesive surfaces. Controls and blanks were run first. On item A2, VMD produced a latent friction skin impression of value on the adhesive face, a partial left hypothenar with clear ridge flow, working creases, and multiple minutiae. ACV proceeded. Examiner Linda Moreno marked ridge endings, bifurcations, and crease relationships. Verification examiner Thomas Beal repeated the comparison blind. Both concluded the latent was suitable for identification. Toolmark's physical fit examiner Anthony Russo photographed the torn edge contours on item A3 and on the free end of a clear tape roll seized later under warrant from a tape gun in David Pritchard's garage, item P017. Under magnification, micro-irregularities interlocked. A photographic series documented a physical fit consistent with common origin. Russo noted that brand and width were common. The weight lay in the unique torn edge, not in manufacture. In parallel, the two rootless hair fragments entered mitochondrial DNA sequencing. The lighter hair embedded on the adhesive face of A2, hair ADH1, and the brown hair recovered from a corrugated flute in the tote, hair tote 1. District Attorney Karen Delaney's office transmitted them with references, Patricia Hart's buccal swab for the victim's maternal line, and, by consent, David Pritchard's buccal for his mtDNA profile. The FBI laboratory's mitochondrial DNA unit reported that hair tote 1 matched the maternal profile of Melissa Hart, supporting contact between Melissa and the tote. Hair ADH1 matched David Pritchard's maternal line profile. The mtDNA report stated the limitation plainly. The hair could have originated from the donor or any maternal line relative. It excluded individuals with different sequences. With VMD latent detail of value and a physical fit lead, Detective Sean Whitaker moved the comparison step he had prepared months earlier. In July 2003, he collected full palm exemplars from prioritized names, including David Pritchard, farmhands Michael Rupp and Charles Haynes, warehouse guard Nathan O'Leary, and maintenance worker Raymond Lutz. Sergeant Donna Pierce logged each card and secured them. ACE-V comparison of the A2 adhesive latent to the palm exemplars identified the impression to David Pritchard's left palm hypothenar. Moreno and Beal documented corresponding features and spatial relationships. No unexplained dissimilarities were noted. A second latent of lesser quality appeared on B5, tack room cardboard with adhered tape. It was deemed insufficient for identification. Detective Whitaker consolidated the lab outputs into a sealed probable cause affidavit reviewed by Lieutenant Raymond Keller, PSP Troop H, and DA Delaney. The affidavit's evidentiary pillars were: VMD developed latent left hypothenar impression on the adhesive face of A2, identified to David Pritchard by ACE-V with verification. Physical fit between the torn edge of A3 and the free end of the clear tape roll on Pritchard's garage tape gun, P017. Documented by photographic series and examiner notes. mtDNA sequence from hair ADH1 matching Pritchard's maternal line profile with limitations stated, hair tote 1 matching Melissa Hart's maternal line. Scene context: A1 through A3 collected within feet of the driver's door of Melissa's locked vehicle at the Blue Barn cutout. Adhesive faces protected since October 1999. Chain of custody continuous. Pritchard's 1999 and 2002 statements denying presence on Cornman Road the night of the disappearance contrasted with adhesive side palm placement and tape physical fit at that location. Judge Michael T. Rowland authorized a sealed arrest warrant and a separate search warrant. The arrest executed at 6:46 a.m., documented in Part 1. The concurrent search at the residence and garage yielded items P014 through P021, clear tape rolls, a tape gun with partially used roll, P017, a red-handled box cutter with adhesive residue, P012, and event supplies. All were packaged with adhesive protection and logged by Sergeant Pierce. Grand jury proceedings in Franklin County followed in late October 2003. DA Karen Delaney presented the VMD latent identification, the physical fit series, the mtDNA reports, and chain of custody testimony from Sergeant Pierce, with Detective Whitaker on scene collection and preservation. The grand jury returned a true bill charging David Pritchard with kidnapping and second-degree murder, homicide committed during the perpetration of a felony under Pennsylvania law. Defense counsel John Wexler moved to suppress the VMD-derived latent, to exclude the physical fit testimony, and to limit mtDNA interpretation. A Daubert hearing was set. Dr. Stephen Collier, director of the regional VMD unit, testified to method, controls, error rates, and publications. Linda Moreno, CLPE, explained the ACE-V process and presented the marked comparison. Anthony Russo described physical fit methodology and the uniqueness of torn edge interdigitation. Dr. Melissa Ortiz from the FBI laboratory explained mtDNA sequencing and its statistical weight with non-uniqueness cautions. The court admitted VMD developed friction skin identifications with proper documentation, admitted physical fit comparisons, and admitted mtDNA with limiting instruction. Trial began in March 2004 before Judge Rowland in the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas. The Commonwealth's order of proof was chronological and technical. Detective Whitaker detailed the 1999 scene, items A1 to A3, the tote, and preservation decisions. Sergeant Pierce walked the jury through logs, seal signatures, and transfer times from 1999 to 2003. Linda Moreno presented the VMD photographs, pre-deposition, post-gold, post-zinc, final latent, then the ACV map overlaying the latent hypothenar with Pritchard's palm exemplar. Jurors saw labeled minutiae and crease alignments. Verification was documented. Anthony Russo displayed the edge profile overlays for A3 and P017, demonstrating physical fit. He emphasized that tape brand was common. The fit relied on unique tear morphology. Dr. Melissa Ortiz testified that hair tote 1 matched Melissa Hart's maternal profile, and that hair ADH1 matched David Pritchard's maternal line profile. She stated that mtDNA cannot individualize to a single person but can exclude most others. Lieutenant Keller explained the 2003 coordination that brought VMD access and mtDNA funding. The Commonwealth also entered Pritchard's 1999 and 2002 statements denying presence at the cutout. D.A. Delaney argued that an adhesive face palm print and a torn edge physical fit placed Pritchard's hand on the tape deployed beside Melissa's car at the time and place of disappearance, contrary to his statements. The mtDNA hair on the adhesive corroborated contact with the tape by a member of his maternal line. The defense emphasized Pritchard's civic roles, the ubiquity of clear tape in schools and churches, the possibility of secondary transfer, the non-uniqueness of mtDNA, and the absence of a body. Counsel suggested the tape fragments could have been deposited by unknown persons or at a different time and argued that physical fit proved only common origin, not timing. On rebuttal, Linda Moreno addressed secondary transfer on adhesive. The A2 latent was on the adhesive face protected by curl and sealed storage. Ridge clarity and feature count were consistent with primary deposition. Anthony Russo reiterated that the torn edge fit included microfeatures unlikely to recur by chance. Chain of custody remained unchallenged. Judge Rowland instructed the jury on circumstantial evidence, expert testimony, and the mtDNA limitation. Deliberations lasted parts of 2 days. The jury returned guilty verdicts on kidnapping and second-degree murder. The court polled the jurors individually. Each affirmed. Sentencing occurred in May 2004. Under Pennsylvania law, second-degree murder carries a mandatory term of life imprisonment. Judge Rowland imposed life imprisonment for second-degree murder and merged the kidnapping count for sentencing as required. Restitution for specific investigative costs was ordered. Certifications and clearances associated with David Pritchard's employment and volunteer roles were revoked administratively. Victim impact statements were read into the record by Patricia Hart and Emily Davenport. The statements recited dates, search efforts, and the effect of the interval between 1999 and arrest. They thanked Chambersburg Police Department, PSP Troop H, PSP BFS Latent and Toolmarks units, and the FBI Laboratory for mtDNA analysis. There were no remarks to the defendant from the lectern. The court recessed. Post-trial, Sergeant Donna Pierce updated evidence status. A1 through A3 retained under court order, P017 retained, palm cards retained, VMD bench notes and photographs archived, mtDNA reports filed with limiting instruction attached. Detective Whitaker entered the final case synopsis and closed the primary file. The Blue Barn sign-in ledger remained in custody as part of the record. Administrative notifications issued to Chambersburg Area School District and the South Franklin Youth Baseball League reflected removal of David Pritchard from positions. The file's hinge points were technical. A VMD-developed adhesive face, latent identified by ACE-V to the defendant's left palm. A torn edge physical fit linking a 1999 fragment to a roll seized in 2003, and mtDNA that excluded most others and aligned with the adhesive latent. There was no confession and no recovered body. The laboratory methods, scene preservation, and chain of custody documentation converted adhesive and hair into admissible proof. The arrest at 6:46 a.m., the indictment, the verdict, and the life sentence followed that proof. The family's public statement, released by D.A. Delaney's office, listed names and units and the dates that defined the case. The Blue Barn remained as a landmark. The cutout on Cornman Road returned to its ordinary use. The case number moved from the active shelf to closed status with disposition recorded. The tape fragments, the tape gun roll, the palm card, and the reports stayed sealed. The procedural record matched the outcome: indictment, trial, conviction, sentence.